I speak for the water because water is alive and it does have a spirit, and she hurts every day because of what the people are doing to her today in the world. Polluting the water, dumping toxic waste, even just garbage. I do what I do because our water is sick. The people who own the factories of the world are disrespecting Mother Earth and making our water sick. They are killing her. Mother Earth has been in existence for billions of years, and she doesn't need us, we need her. I met Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the first time in 2016, I'm pretty sure. I just told him about the water issue and what I want to be done in the water crisis and for the First Nations communities that can't drink their water. I feel proud about it because I know that for the children that want to speak up but maybe they're too afraid, I'm speaking up for them, and maybe what the work I'm doing will encourage them to do the work I'm doing, and we can all try and make a change.
I understand, things are different 60 years ago, but today we're making a stand and we won't allow this to be built.
Sites that were areas referred to in this being collectively as Trans Mountain sites.
The new pipeline would triple the system's capacity, from 300,000 barrels a day to 890,000. As a result, the number of oil tankers traveling through the Burrard Inlet is expected to increase sevenfold. This is key to understanding some of the major criticisms coming from environmentalists and Indigenous leaders. A major spill could devastate the coastal environment, which is home to a variety of marine life, including salmon and an endangered species of killer whales. There are only around 80 southern resident whales left, and what's led to their dwindling population is a lack of food. These whales eat salmon, whose stocks remain low throughout the Pacific region. And since these whales hunt using echolocation, environmentalists fear that more tanker noise will make the problem worse. The Raincoast Conservation Foundation says the expansion would risk the extinction of the species. Protests against the pipeline expansion have been going on for years, and Indigenous communities are almost always at the forefront.
We are here because we are so deeply concerned about our future generations. We are so deeply concerned about the land and the waters. But rest assured, there will never, ever be a Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline project.
The new pipeline crosses hundreds of kilometers of unceded Indigenous land. That is, lands that were never signed away through treaties. Many Indigenous people in British Columbia see the project as an infringement on their land rights and title. When the government is making a decision that could impact Indigenous communities, it has a constitutional duty to consult and accommodate them. That doesn't just mean letting people air their concerns before the government ultimately goes ahead with this decision. The government is required to take Indigenous perspectives into account and try to minimize or eliminate the impacts. In late 2017, 6 First Nations, along with the cities of Burnaby and Vancouver and 2 environmental groups, filed a court challenge against Kinder Morgan. They hope to overturn Ottawa's decision to approve the project by arguing that the government failed to adequately consult them.
Concerns were met with vagueness and general responses blanketing all First Nations as though we were stakeholders in our own lands.
7 First Nations in BC launched a similar challenge against the Northern Gateway pipeline. A court ruled in their favor, and the pipeline was permanently halted by Trudeau later that year. The Trans Mountain expansion pits some of the most powerful economic interests in Canada against resilient protests defending Indigenous rights and the environment.
The divisions over the Trans Mountain Pipeline don't end at the border between BC and Alberta. As Briar Stewart tells us, the project is also dividing First Nations in BC.
Not far from where the new Trans Mountain Pipeline would end,
It was built out of one cedar tree.
stands what Indigenous groups are calling a watch house.
I think it's only fitting we put it here.
It's part of a long-standing protest against a project the Prime Minister is committed to.
It's totally unacceptable for him to want to push this through, from Alberta, coming through our traditional territories to this body of water that we're protecting. It's unacceptable to carry on.
No Kinder Morgan!
While the political maneuvering continues, those here say so will the protests. While some First Nations are strongly opposed to this pipeline and are challenging it in court, dozens of others have signed lucrative agreements with Kinder Morgan and are frustrated that they could lose out on millions if the project doesn't go ahead. The Whispering Pines Clinton Indian Band was the first to sign an agreement with Kinder Morgan, and the chief says they're losing out on jobs and tax revenue, which should already be coming their way.
Had they started this in 2014, we would be covering the pipe back up, but you know, we're still 6 months from shovels in the ground. And so those are the kinds of things that my community finds annoying.
While many First Nations communities support the pipeline proposal and are hoping to share in the profits, others say it violates their constitutional rights, calling it a declaration of war against Indigenous peoples. Many maintain the proposed pipeline will be built on land that was never ceded to Canada. The Squamish Nation says it's a continued betrayal by a prime minister who's made a new relationship with First Nations a priority.
Our efforts to build a better relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada are not only about righting historic wrongs. They are about listening and learning and working together.
Joining me now is Ko'Salem, the elected councillor and spokesperson for the Squamish Nation. Ko'Salem, when you hear the Prime Minister at the UN speaking like that, what do you feel?
Well, I feel like given the recent announcement and the actions taken by the Trudeau government, I feel a little bit betrayed. And I think the Squamish people and the Squamish Nation, who I represent, really felt that there was a lot of hope with the election of Justin Trudeau and this government. And I don't think that with the actions of buying the Kinder Morgan pipeline and the way that they've treated our nation in the development of this project, that we feel like he's living up to that promise.
You're speaking specifically around the issue of reconciliation and appropriate consultation, but I wonder, where is your opposition to this pipeline? Is it around the issue of consultation, or do you want to see the oil not taken out of the ground at all?
Some of the issues that we brought forward and other First Nations are brought forward are the issue around marine response plans, around the issue of what happens to our inlet, the Burrard Inlet in Vancouver, which is a beautiful place for our people as well as Vancouverites. What happens if there's a diluted bitumen spill in our inlet? And what the NEB process failed to order or understand was, what was the cleanup plan for that? How can we actually clean up this oil if there was a spill? And what are the impacts when this oil sinks to the ground in the ocean, and then cleanup becomes even more difficult? And so our nation has always felt and maintains that we have a right to our territory that we have to protect for ourselves and future generations. And that includes understanding the impacts to our rights and making sure that our land is protected, that our homes are protected, and that our economy is protected as well.
There are Indigenous people right across this country, and some of them in Alberta in particular actually now support this pipeline. How do you reconcile how different groups of Indigenous people are approaching this?
Well, one of the historical contexts, I think, for all of this is that the Canadian government, going back to the founding of Canada, has systemically kept Indigenous peoples in poverty. And we see that through the history of the residential school system or the reserve system, and the way that we are not able to really control the land that belongs to us. And so the government over the years has left us in poverty, and we're finding ways to try and climb our way out of that. For my people, we are progressive in terms of how we develop our businesses to take advantage of the opportunities. But a pipeline and increased oil tankers threatens our economy as a people and the way of life that we have here in the city of Vancouver. So other First Nations have to make their choices within their territories, and we respect the rights of other First Nations to make those choices. But for us in our territory, we have to defend our rights and protect our interests.
What do you?
The controversial Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project obviously hitting a major speed bump today for people who wanted the project to go through. The Federal Court of Appeal basically striking down the Liberal government's approval of it, saying on at least one front, Indigenous groups weren't adequately consulted. Squamish Nation was one of the litigants. Now they're calling on the Prime Minister to completely abandon the Trans Mountain expansion. Their elected councillor and spokesperson, Ko'Salem, joins us now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So here we have a ruling from the Federal Court of Appeal basically saying the matter has to go back to the National Energy Board. There was not proper consultation from Ottawa with Indigenous groups, but also the idea of the environmental impact of a spill in the ocean. So these are issues to put back before the National Energy Board, but you say don't even take it back there. The Prime Minister should just cancel this. Well, what would be the grounds for just canceling it outright?
Well, our contention from the very beginning is that the Trudeau government promised a new relationship with Indigenous peoples, but then behaved dishonorably in its conduct on this project. When we were meeting with the government about this project, they would send low-level bureaucrats who, in effect, were note takers. There was no meaningful conversation, and the way that we know this, and what the court decision reaffirmed, was that when we put forward our concerns, it didn't have a material impact on any of the final recommendations or approval processes when it got to cabinet or when it got to the National Energy Board. So consultation at the very minimum means that when we have concerns, when we have things that need to be addressed as it relates to our rights, that it's going to have an impact on the end result, but it didn't. And so this whole process has been flawed from the beginning, and the Squamish Nation wants the Trudeau government to respect our rights, and this project has been, from our position, a very big risk, a very big concern, and none of our issues have been addressed through the consultation process or by any of the actions of the government.
Now, the government, we heard from our finance minister, Bill Morneau, on BNN Bloomberg just about an hour ago. They're still looking at the decision. But if we end up back before the National Energy Board, and there is a consultation that I guess we feel that has respected the process, if they go back and they do it right in the way that the court said that they didn't do it, and the decision is still to go through with the project, is that something that you could live with?
Well, we as a nation, and I think Canada is a country of laws which has a constitution, and Section 35 of that constitution protects Indigenous rights. For the Squamish Nation, our rights are to our self-determination and to our jurisdiction over our territory. Vancouver, the harbour where this pipeline project would end and the tanker traffic would travel through, our perspective as a nation is that we want to have full jurisdiction over what happens in our territory, that we've been denied this right for too long, and that if we're going to engage in any sort of approval project for anything in our territory, we are the real landowners within our territory. We have title to this land with our other neighboring nations, and that a process has to be done that meets our standards, not just the government's.
We're winning. We've been living in these lands and waters, and we've been governing ourselves for thousands of years. We've been governing and taking care of and being stewards of our lands and our waters. It was a hard fight, but I'm glad today the courts heard the teachings of our culture and our spirit and how we carry ourselves. Any of the people up here that represent the nations could have negotiated for millions, but we can't put a price on the things that we love. When we talked to the government, we said, in Kinder Morgan, when I went to their AGM, we said, if you win, we all lose, including you. If we win, like we did today, we all win. This is a victory for Canada. The victories were won.
In 2015, I stood across the inlet at Kate's Park, and I said it was a very sad day because we had to go to court to fight Canada. And again, I want to remind and let everybody know it's not our nature to fight. We don't want to fight you. We don't want to fight Canada. And today, the court came back in a favorable decision for us. And we all have to step back and think, what does this really mean for Canada? I want everyone to believe it's going to be good. It has to be good. We did everything in the right way to bring us to this point. We're not here, again, to fight with you, or Kinder Morgan as per se, the people. We're here to protect what we need to protect for our future generations, and that is the bottom line. We're here to protect for our survival as the human race in this world. If we don't start now, and if we wait for somebody else to do it, is that time going to be too late? We need to all come together and find a way to ensure our future generations can enjoy this world to the extent that we do.
After being approved, then delayed, then suspended, then saved, then delayed again, construction is now officially underway on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion.
Comes to no surprise what was announced today by Trudeau. Not long ago, we gave him a choice. And that is the choice of, we could do this the easy way, or we could do it the hard way. And of course, they chose the hard way.
The federal government's decision to buy the pipeline and become the owner makes it impossible to make an unbiased, open-minded decision. TWN, after consultation with our community and our council, we will be appealing this decision to the Federal Court of Appeal.
Today, I think it's another failure, and time will prove that this is the wrong decision and almost a $5 billion mistake.
I'm feeling like this is a bit of a deja vu in that we've been here before, and it's hard to be in this relationship with the federal government and constantly be trying to say the same thing and to not be heard. So it's difficult to have this kind of relationship that where we're trying to meet in a good way, but it doesn't seem that the other party wants to. We'll be looking at the decision today in detail and reviewing it with our legal, but we are prepared to go to court and to look at legal challenges to what we feel is a very wrong process for how they've engaged with us. Our people especially have the right to express themselves and to voice their opposition. Many of our people are very vocally opposed to this, and as a nation we'll continue to support the rights of our members to express their dissatisfaction with the way this government is going.
When the Natural Resources Minister threatened to send in the army, right? I mean, that's how committed they were to this years ago. Threatening to send in an army. And, I would get booed in Parliament all the time by standing up and telling a Prime Minister there'd be hell to pay if they move forward with this project. And I still feel the same way. It is a very, very bad decision.
Reconciliation stopped today. Right now, today. So we're standing here together in this little bit delay that we have in stopping this pipeline, because we're still trudging forward. We always said that we would do what it takes to make sure that we stop this pipeline. We have proven it. It's not in the best interest of our nations that are standing here, for Vancouver, for British Columbia, for Canada. This government is incapable of making sound decisions for our future generations. So we are and we will. Even for their children, we will take those steps to make sure that Canada stays the way it is.
Is it enough to say that the consultation that tsleil-waututh, Coldwater, and Squamish Nation received is reasonable and adequate in law when we know that the record of evidence that was presented to the court was not examined? I think that sets a low bar for reconciliation. And is not reconciliation the most important item on the Prime Minister's agenda? Did he not say reconciliation was important and the most important relationship to him was with First Nations? Well, we need to see some of that now.
This government continues to push oil and gas pipelines, knowing that the science is clear, that infrastructure such as an expansion of the tar sands in Alberta through an oil and gas or oil pipeline like the Trans Mountain Project is not in the best interest of this country or in our communities or our planet, when we're risking unstable climate for future generations.
The court did confirm that the route through the Coldwater Valley still has to be determined. The risks to our community drinking water still need to be studied. That work is underway. The court has confirmed Canada has ongoing duty to consult with us on these very important issues. We will continue to stand strong and do everything in our power to ensure our sole source of drinking water is protected.